Didn't fight. I didn't cry. I just walked back to my car, buckled my son into his seat, and made one phone call. That's how it ended, but I should tell you how it started. My name doesn't matter as much as the number, $82,000. That's what I put into my half-brother's restaurant launch, every cent of it. And when the opening night gala came around, the one I had planned, the one I had paid for, the one I had spent 4 months coordinating, my son and I were turned away at the door. I'm 31. I work in commercial real estate in Calgary. I've been doing it since I was 24, grinding through winters that feel personal, building a client base from nothing, learning to read contracts the way other people read novels, carefully, between the lines, looking for what isn't said. My father passed away 3 years ago. He left behind a small inheritance, split between me and my half-brother, Rhett, who is 6 years older and has always moved through the world like it owes him something soft to land on. Rhett is charming. I want to say that honestly because it's important to understand why people keep giving him things. He has this way of making you feel like you're the only person in the room, like whatever you're saying is the most interesting thing he's heard all week. He's tall, and he laughs easily, and when he turns that attention on you, you feel warm. I had spent most of my life trying to earn that warmth from him. He's my brother. Half-brother, technically. But I never used that word growing up. I just called him my brother. His wife Tamsin is another story. She's polished in a way that feels engineered. Every word she says has been weighed before it leaves her mouth. She was pleasant to me in that arm's-length way some people are present but not close, warm enough to avoid conflict, never warm enough to mean it. I told myself it was just her personality. I told myself a lot of things. When Rhett came to me with the restaurant idea 2 years ago, I was skeptical. He'd had ideas before, a craft brewery that never got past the permit stage, a food truck that lasted 1 summer, a consulting business that I'm still not entirely sure what it was meant to consult on. But this time, he had a space, a heritage building on 17th Avenue in Calgary that used to be a dry goods store. Exposed brick and original hardwood, the kind of space that makes people pull out their phones before they've even sat down. He had a concept. He had a chef he'd been working with for a year. A guy named Francois who had done time at a respected kitchen in Montreal and genuinely knew what he was doing. He just didn't have the money. My father's inheritance, my share, was sitting in a TFSA. I had been adding to it, slowly, carefully. It was supposed to be a down payment on something, a bigger office, eventually a second property, something for my son Elliot's education fund, which I had barely started. Elliot was 7 at the time. His father and I had been separated for 2 years. I was the primary parent. That's not a complaint, it's just context. Rhett laid out the business plan across my kitchen table on a Tuesday night in February. He had it bound, which I remember noticing. A bound document means someone took it to a print shop, which means they thought about it more than once. I read it over 2 evenings. I asked a colleague to look at the projections. The margins were thin but not impossible. Francois' name attached to the project meant something in this city's food circles. The space was the kind of space that, in Calgary's current dining market, could genuinely work. I asked my brother what he needed from me specifically. He said he needed a co-signer on the vendor contracts and someone to front the launch costs, catering for the gala, the lighting and AV setup, the PR firm, the invitations, the bar program for opening night. He had secured the building lease and the equipment financing separately. He just needed the event itself to go well, because the event was the introduction to the investors he was still courting for the next round. I said I needed a few things in return: my name on the business as a founding partner, a formal repayment structure for what I put in, and a contract. He agreed to all of it. I drafted the contract myself. Or rather, I drafted the outline and had my real estate lawyer tighten the language. It covered the event costs, the repayment timeline, and a clause specifying that as a co-signer on the vendor agreements, I retained the right to modify or cancel those agreements up to the day of the event in the case of a material breach. I included that clause because I've been in enough deals to know that you build the exit before you need it. Rhett signed. Tamsin witnessed. I transferred the money in 3 tranches over the following months, the deposit to the venue company handling the gala, then the AV and lighting firm, then the catering and bar service, $82,000 total spread across 4 vendors, all contracts in my name as the commissioning party. The months that followed were busy in the way that feels productive. I drove Elliot to hockey twice a week. I closed 2 commercial leases in Beltline. I helped Rhett with the guest list for the gala, sent emails on his behalf when his follow-up rate was too slow, and proofread the press release that went out to the food and lifestyle publications. I brought Elliot to the restaurant space one Saturday while the renovation was nearly finished and watched him run his hand along the brick wall and say it looked like a castle. I thought about my father, who would have liked this, not the restaurant specifically, but the idea of his 2 kids building something together. I should have known something was wrong about 6 weeks before opening night, but I missed the signs because I was looking at the wrong things. Tamsin started handling more of the communication. Rhett would respond to my messages hours late, sometimes not until the next day, and when I'd ask about something specific, the seating arrangement for the gala, whether Francois needed anything from the vendors, he'd say Tamsin had it handled. I assumed she was being useful. I assumed this was normal division of labor. I've done enough deals to know that when one party starts going quiet, it usually means they're either overwhelmed or they're building distance. I assumed overwhelmed. 3 weeks before opening night, I got a call from the PR firm. They wanted to confirm the final guest list and asked which table the founding partners would be seated at. I said I assumed front of house, close to where Francois would be coming out to speak. There was a pause. The woman said she'd check with Tamsin and get back to me. She never got back to me. I called Rhett that night. He answered on the 4th ring and said everything was great, really coming together. He was exhausted but excited. I asked about the seating. He said, "Oh, Tamsin's handling the floor plan. She'll send it over." He sounded normal. He laughed once at something I said. I went to bed thinking it was fine. I found out what the floor plan actually looked like the morning of the gala because I went to the venue to drop off a framed photo, a photo of my father at a restaurant he loved, which Rhett had asked me to bring weeks earlier, said he wanted it near the bar as a small tribute. I arrived at 10 in the morning while the setup crew was still working. I walked in and gave the photo to the event coordinator, a young woman named Petra who was moving very fast and checking things off a clipboard. I asked her where the founding partner table was. She looked up from her clipboard and her face did something careful. She said, "I'm sorry, I have to check something," and walked away. She came back 3 minutes later and said there were some updates to the guest list that had come through from Tamsin and she'd need to make a call before she could confirm my seating. I stood there in the middle of a restaurant I had paid for, watching the lighting crew hang fixtures I had bought, and I felt something very quiet settle in my chest. I said I'd come back for the event. I drove home, got Elliot from my neighbors, fed him lunch, and started getting us both ready. Elliot wore his gray dress shirt. He asked me if Uncle Rhett's restaurant would have chicken fingers, and I told him probably not the way he was imagining, though we'd find something good. He was happy. He'd been looking forward to this for weeks. We arrived at the venue at 6:45. The gala started at 7. There was a check-in table at the front entrance staffed by 2 people I didn't recognize, which wasn't unusual for an event this size. I walked up with Elliot's hand in mine and gave my name. The woman at the table looked at her list. She looked at it for a second too long. She said, "I'm sorry, I don't see you here." I said, "I'm on the founding partner list. I co-signed the vendor contracts. My name is on the event commission." She said she'd need to call someone and asked me to step to the side. Elliot looked up at me. He's 8 now, sharp as anything, picks up on tone the way kids do when they've spent time around adults who don't always say what they mean. He asked me quietly if we were in trouble. I told him no. I told him everything was fine. 2 minutes later, a man came out from inside, someone I'd never seen before, broad-shouldered, with an earpiece and a lanyard that said SEC Urity. He was holding a phone with a photo on the screen. He turned it toward the check-in woman, not toward me, but I could see it. It was a photo of Elliot. It was his school photo from last year. The one I had sent to Rhett months ago when he'd asked for a family photo for the opening night slideshow. There was a note below it. I couldn't read the full text from where I was standing, but I saw the words, "Do not admit." I felt the air go out of me. Elliot was 8 years old. He was wearing his gray dress shirt. He was holding my hand at the door of a restaurant his mother had paid for, and his school photo had been put on a do not admit list. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I crouched down so I was level with Elliot's face and I said very calmly, "We're going to go back to the car for a minute, okay? I have to make a phone call." He looked at me with that particular look he gets when he's deciding whether to believe me, and then he nodded and we walked back to the car together. I put him in his seat. I put on a podcast he likes, a kid's science show about space. I sat in the driver's seat and I looked at the steering wheel for exactly 30 seconds. Then I opened my contacts and called the AV and lighting company. I had the project manager's direct line because I had been the one managing that relationship for 4 months. He answered. I identified myself, confirmed I was the commissioning party on file, and told him I was exercising the modification clause in our contract and requesting a full suspension of services effective immediately. He asked if there was a problem. I said there was a breach of the terms under which the commission was made. He said he'd need a minute to confirm with his crew. I said, "I'll wait." I called the catering company while he was confirming. Same conversation, almost word for word. Same answer, they'd need a minute. The bar service was third. The floor coordinator was fourth. I sat in the car with my son listening to a podcast about Saturn, and I made 4 phone calls in 11 minutes. At 7:04, the lights inside the restaurant cut to half. The sound system went silent mid-track. I could see it from the parking lot, the warm amber glow through the front windows dimming, the low hum of the music stopping. A few guests who had already arrived were visible through the glass, turning around, looking up at the ceiling. At 7:12, a man I didn't recognize came out the front door and looked at the parking lot. He went back inside. At 7:19, my phone rang. It was Rhett. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring again. The third call came from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it. The voice on the other end was measured, older, with the kind of unhurried quality that comes from decades of not needing to convince anyone of anything. He introduced himself as Howard, Francois's financial backer and the lead investor for the restaurant's second-round funding. He said he was calling because he had arrived at the gala to find that the event was not functioning, that the catering staff had been told to stand down, and that one of the vendors had mentioned the commissioning party had exercised a termination clause. He said, "I'd like to understand what happened if you're willing to talk." I was willing. I told him calmly and in order what I had invested, what I had been promised, what the contract said, what I had seen on that security phone. I told him about Elliot's school photo on a do not admit list. I kept my voice level the entire time. I was not performing composure. I was actually composed because at that point I had already made my decisions and there was nothing left to be afraid of. There was a long pause on the other end. Howard said, "Give me 20 minutes. He called back in 16. He said that he had spoken with Rhett and Tamsin and that Tamsin had been, his word was forthright, about the guest list decisions. He said he had also spoken to Francois, who had not been aware that I was excluded and who was, in Howard's words, extremely unhappy about it. He said that he was withdrawing his commitment to the second-round funding, effective that conversation, and that he would be documenting his reasons. He said, "I'm sorry this happened to you, and I'm sorry it happened in front of your son." I thanked him. I hung up. Elliot had fallen asleep in the back seat. He does that. He goes from completely alert to out cold in about 4 minutes when he's tired and the podcast is calm enough. I sat there watching him breathe in the rearview mirror, and I let myself feel it for a moment, all of it. The humiliation of being turned away at the door of something I built. The particular sick feeling of seeing my child's photo used as a weapon. The grief underneath everything that had nothing to do with the restaurant and everything to do with the fact that I had been trying for 31 years to have a real brother. I drove home. My phone rang 7 more times that night. Rhett, then Tamsin, then Rhett again. then a number that turned out to be Tamsin's mother, then Rhett twice more, then a number I didn't recognize that left a voicemail I still haven't listened to. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and I gave Elliot a bath and read him 2 chapters of the book we were working through. A story about a girl who discovers her grandmother was a spy, and when he was asleep, I sat on the edge of his bed for a while in the dark. The next morning, I called my lawyer. The contract was clear. I was the commissioning party on 4 vendor agreements. The modification clause had been exercised within the terms. The vendors had complied. There was no ambiguity. What was ambiguous was the founding partner arrangement, which we had memorialized in the contract but which I had never enforced in writing beyond the initial signatures. Something my lawyer pointed out with the particular gentleness lawyers use when they're also saying you should have been more careful. She said I had a strong case for recovery of the event costs and potentially additional damages given the circumstances. She said if I wanted to pursue it, we could. I said I'd think about it. I did think about it. For about 48 hours I thought about almost nothing else, not the money specifically but the question underneath the money, which was, what do I actually want to happen here? The answer, when I found it, was simpler than I expected. I wanted Elliot to never have to be in that parking lot again. I wanted to stop performing closeness with people who had decided, at some point I couldn't identify, that he and I were not worth a seat at a table I had paid for. I wanted to stop confusing investment with belonging. I sent Rhett one message. It said, "My lawyer will be in touch regarding recovery of the event costs. I have nothing else to say to you right now." He responded 20 minutes later with 3 paragraphs. I read them once and did not respond. He sent a follow-up the next day. I read it once and did not respond. A week later, he sent a voice memo 11 minutes long. I haven't listened to it, not because I'm afraid of what it says, but because there is nothing in it that is more important than the time it would take to listen. Tamsin sent me a text that said, "I think there was a misunderstanding. I hope we can talk when things calm down." I read that one twice, mostly because I was trying to understand what the misunderstanding could possibly have been. A child's school photo on a do not admit list doesn't happen by misunderstanding. Someone types those words, someone prints that photo, someone hands it to a security guard and says, "This one doesn't come in." I didn't respond. My lawyer filed the demand letter 2 weeks later. It cited the contract, the modification clause, and the documented costs. It also cited a section of the Alberta Consumer Protection Framework around good faith dealing and commercial agreements, which my lawyer included mostly to communicate that we had done the research and were prepared to go further. The demand was for the full $82,000. I got a call from Rhett's lawyer 9 days after the demand letter. Their position was that the modification clause had been exercised in bad faith and that I had caused damages to the business by shutting down the gala. My lawyer responded in writing with the clause language and a timeline of events. There was a round of letters. It took 6 weeks. They settled. Full amount, paid in 3 installments over 90 days per an agreement that also formally dissolved my role as founding partner, which I had already mentally dissolved the night I sat in that parking lot. The last installment landed on a Thursday. I saw the notification on my phone while I was waiting to pick Elliot up from school. He came running out with his backpack half open and a drawing he'd done in art class, a lopsided house with a very large dog out front, which he explained at length on the walk to the car. "We don't have a dog. He's been campaigning for one for 8 months. I put the drawing on the fridge when we got home. I made pasta. We watched 30 minutes of television and then I read him his chapters and turned off his light. I stood in the hallway afterward and I thought about my father, who had liked Rhett, who had tried his whole life to hold 2 families together in the loose, careful way of people who know they're asking a lot. I thought about the photo of Elliot on that security phone, and I thought about the fact that my son had fallen asleep in the back of a car in a parking lot and hadn't asked me too many questions about it, because somewhere in his 8 years he had already learned that sometimes the answer is just that people don't always do the right thing. I'm not angry. I want to be clear about that. Anger would mean I still expected something, and I've stopped expecting things from people who have already shown me exactly who they are. What I have is clarity, and the $82,000 returned in full, And a kid who still makes drawings of houses with dogs we don't own yet. That's enough. That's more than enough. I keep thinking about Elliot's gray dress shirt. He picked it out himself that morning, asked me if he looked professional enough, and I told him he looked perfect. He was 8 years old and he wanted to make his uncle proud. That's the part that stays with me. Not the money, not the contract, not the 4 phone calls I made from the parking lot. It's the gray shirt. It's the fact that he fell asleep in the back seat listening to a podcast about Saturn while his school photo was sitting on a security guard's phone with the words "Do not admit" underneath it. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that night. Not in any dramatic way, just the quiet, practical way you think about things when you've had time to sit with them. Every outcome in this story traces back to a choice. Thompson chose to type those words. Rhett chose to sign a contract he had no intention of honoring. And I chose, for years, to keep investing in people who had already shown me their limits. None of that is mysterious. It's just what happens when you ignore what's in front of you because you want something to be different than it is. What I know now is that the choices you make when you're hurt or tired or grieving, those choices have weight. I spent that money partly because I missed my father. I wanted to build something with his son, carry something of him forward. That was real. But grief isn't a business plan, and love isn't a contract. And wanting family to mean something doesn't make it mean something if the other people at the table have already decided it doesn't. What got me through wasn't anger. It was the fact that I had read the contract carefully. I had built the exit before I needed it. That clause wasn't cynicism, it was clarity. Knowing your own position, understanding the terms you've agreed to, being honest about risk, that's not coldness. That's how you protect the people who actually depend on you. Elliot depends on me. He's the whole point. Every decision I make runs through that fact first. Howard called me because he was the kind of person who, when something didn't add up, needed to understand why. He didn't have to call. He could have walked away from the whole situation and found a different investment. Instead, he picked up the phone and asked me to tell him what happened, and he listened. That mattered more to me than the settlement. It was proof that doing things the right way, being straight, being documented, being calm, still reaches people. Not always, but enough. I think about the version of me who might have stood at that check-in table and argued, who might have made a scene, said things that couldn't be unsaid, given Rhett and Thompson the chaos they seemed to be bracing for. That version doesn't recover the money. That version gives Elliot a different memory of that night. The version of me that walked back to the car, buckled him in and made 4 quiet phone calls, that version got her son home safe and her money back in full. Resilience isn't a personality trait. It's a series of decisions made in small moments, usually when you're tired and it would be easier to fall apart. Rhett is still out there somewhere, probably already building the next thing. I genuinely hope it goes better for him than this did, but I'm not part of it. The drawing is still on the fridge. The house, the giant dog we don't have yet. Elliot made it on a day when he was happy, and it shows. That's what I'm working toward, just that.